April 1945. As Allied forces advanced into the German heartland, military operations generated unprecedented numbers of prisoners. Among them were thousands of Wehrmacht auxiliaries, Nachrichtenhelferinnen, or communications assistants, young women who had served in support roles since 1940. These personnel operated switchboards, transmitted orders, and maintained communication networks. They wore Feldgrau uniforms and held military status under German law, making them legitimate POWs under the 1929 Geneva Convention. The Wehrmacht had mobilized approximately 450,000 women into auxiliary services by 1944, according to Bundesarchiv records. Most served in communications, clerical, and medical roles, freeing male soldiers for combat duties. As German defenses collapsed, these units retreated westward with Wehrmacht formations, seeking capture by Western allies rather than Soviet forces. In Bavaria, Allied processing centers handled massive prisoner flows. Declassified U.S. Army reports indicate that by May 1945, approximately 7.5 million German military personnel were in Allied custody. Female auxiliaries presented unique administrative challenges. U.S. forces initially held them in temporary facilities near capture sites while determining their legal status and appropriate detention procedures. The distinction between combatants and non-combatants required careful documentation. Each prisoner underwent processing: name, rank, unit, date of birth. This information was recorded on standardized forms and transmitted to the Prisoner of War Information Bureau in Geneva, which maintained central records and facilitated Red Cross communications with families. Transportation arrangements followed established military logistics. Prisoners traveled by rail to staging areas, then to ports for overseas transfer. The decision to transport German POWs to North America reflected practical considerations. Secure detention required significant resources, and European facilities were overwhelmed. Between 1943 and 1946, the United States held approximately 425,000 German POWs in camps across the continental U.S. Female prisoners presented additional considerations. Geneva Convention Article 3 required separate quarters and facilities. U.S. authorities designated specific camps with appropriate infrastructure. Medical screening preceded embarkation. Standard procedure to prevent disease transmission during ocean crossings. If you appreciate evidence-based World War II history told with documentary precision, please like and subscribe. Comment below with your location. We'd like to know where our viewers are watching from. The Atlantic crossing typically required 7 to 10 days aboard converted troop transports. Ships maintained Geneva Convention standards, adequate food, medical care, and humane conditions. Naval personnel supervised embarkation procedures, ensuring proper documentation and manifest accuracy. Each vessel carried International Red Cross observers who verified compliance with international law. Transatlantic prisoner transport operations followed protocols established in 1943 when large-scale German POW transfers began. The U.S. War Department's Provost Marshal General's Office oversaw all aspects of POW administration, including shipping arrangements, security and maintenance of international law standards. Converted cargo vessels and troop carriers transported prisoners. Ships maintained separate sections for POWs, with guards posted at access points. Geneva Convention requirements specified minimum space per prisoner, approximately 60 square feet, and adequate ventilation. Medical personnel accompanied each transport, conducting daily health inspections. Rations met Geneva Convention Article 11 requirements. Prisoners received the same quality and quantity of food as depot troops of the detaining power. For Atlantic crossings, this meant 3 meals daily, typically bread, soup, coffee, and occasionally meat. Water supplies underwent regular quality testing. The crossing presented challenges. Rough seas caused seasickness among prisoners unaccustomed to ocean travel. Medical staff treated minor ailments and monitored for infectious diseases. Isolation procedures existed for anyone showing symptoms of tuberculosis or typhus, diseases that had spread through European populations during the war's final months. Security maintained a visible presence without excessive restriction. Guards conducted periodic counts and inspections, but generally allowed prisoners freedom of movement within designated areas. Evening hours included supervised time on deck, weather permitting, providing fresh air and reducing confinement stress. Communication with prisoners required interpreters, either bilingual US personnel or cooperative POWs who spoke both German and English. These individuals facilitated instructions about ship procedures, meal times, and safety regulations. Translation accuracy was critical for preventing misunderstandings that could escalate tensions. Historical records from the Provost Marshal General's Office indicate that between 1943 and 1946, approximately 890 ship voyages transported Axis POWs to North American detention facilities. Incidents of violence or serious disciplinary problems remained rare. Most prisoners cooperated, recognizing that resistance served no practical purpose. Fort Oglethorpe, located in northwestern Georgia near Chattanooga, Tennessee, functioned as a processing center for prisoners of war. Originally established as a cavalry post in 1902, the facility was reactivated in 1940 as an army training installation. By 1943, portions of the base housed German POWs. The installation covered approximately 3,000 acres. Barracks, mess halls, administrative buildings, and medical facilities provided infrastructure for both military personnel and detained prisoners. Perimeter security consisted of wire fencing, guard towers, and regular patrols. The camp operated under command of the U.S. Army Military Police Corps. Processing procedures followed standardized protocols. Upon arrival, prisoners underwent medical examination, delousing if necessary, and formal registration. Personal property was inventoried and stored. Each prisoner received an identification number and camp regulations printed in German. Photographs and fingerprints completed the documentation. Female POWs required separate facilities per Geneva Convention Article 3. Fort Oglethorpe designated specific barracks for women, with female U.S. Army nurses or WWII personnel supervising certain functions. Male guards maintained perimeter security, but did not enter female quarters without authorized female personnel present. Camp regulations prohibited fraternization between guards and prisoners beyond necessary official interactions. This policy, enforced through military discipline, aimed to maintain security and prevent compromising situations. Violations resulted in disciplinary action, including reassignment or court-martial. Daily routines began with morning roll call. Prisoners lined up for count, a security measure ensuring no escapes occurred overnight. Following count, work assignments were distributed. Geneva Convention Article 27 permitted prisoners to be required to work, excluding military-related labor. Typical assignments included camp maintenance, laundry, kitchen assistance, and agricultural work. Compensation for labor came in canteen coupons rather than U.S. currency. Prisoners could exchange these coupons for approved items: toiletries, writing materials, cigarettes, candy. This system complied with Geneva Convention requirements while preventing circulation of U.S. money among POWs. The 1929 Geneva Convention, relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, established comprehensive standards for POW detention. The United States ratified this treaty in 1932. U.S. compliance was not merely legal obligation, but strategic policy. American officials recognized that German treatment of U.S. POWs often reflected reciprocal standards. Article 11 mandated that prisoners receive rations equal in quantity and quality to depot troops. In practice, this meant German POWs in U.S. camps ate the same food as American soldiers performing similar duties at military bases. Daily rations included meat, bread, vegetables, dairy products, and coffee, significantly more substantial than German military rations by 1944-45. This policy created notable disparities. While German civilians faced severe shortages due to strategic bombing and disrupted supply lines, German POWs in American camps received adequate nutrition. U.S. military authorities justified this approach by citing both Geneva requirements and practical considerations. Well-fed prisoners remained healthier, caused fewer disciplinary problems, and required less medical intervention. Medical care followed similar principles. Each POW camp maintained an infirmary staffed by US Army medical personnel. German medical officers or trained auxiliaries among the prisoners assisted under American supervision. Treatment protocols matched those provided to US military personnel. Records from the Office of the Provost Marshal General indicate low mortality rates among German POWs, approximately 0.15% annually, primarily from pre-existing conditions or accidents. Recreation and welfare provisions included educational opportunities, religious services, and recreational activities. Camps established libraries stocked with German language books approved by US authorities. Sports equipment, footballs, volleyballs, was provided for exercise during non-work hours. Musical instruments were permitted, and prisoners formed orchestras or singing groups. Religious observance received official support. Protestant and Catholic chaplains held services. Jewish prisoners could request kosher food and observe religious holidays. This accommodation, mandated by Geneva Article 16, contrasted sharply with Nazi religious policies that many prisoners had previously experienced. Male privileges allowed prisoners to send and receive correspondence through the International Red Cross. Outgoing letters underwent censorship to prevent intelligence leakage, but personal news passed freely. Incoming mail from Germany faced delays due to disrupted European postal systems, but Red Cross representatives worked to maintain communication links between POWs and families. Female Wehrmacht auxiliaries occupied a unique position within POW populations. Unlike male soldiers captured in combat, these women had served primarily in administrative and communications roles. Their treatment required additional consideration under Geneva Convention provisions regarding female prisoners. US Army regulations specified that female POWs receive quarters separate from male prisoners. Facilities included adequate washing facilities, privacy screens, and female supervisory personnel. These requirements strained some installations not originally designed for mixed-gender detention, but adaptations were implemented as policy required. Work assignments for female prisoners emphasized camp support functions: laundry operations, kitchen assistance, sewing and uniform repair, clerical work. These assignments aligned with Geneva Convention Article 27, which prohibited dangerous or unhealthy labor and required work appropriate to prisoners' age and physical condition. Medical care for women included gynecological services when needed. Female nurses or doctors conducted examinations. Pregnancy among POWs occasionally occurred, relationships formed before capture, and US authorities provided prenatal care and childbirth assistance. Infants born to POW mothers in US camps were documented and received appropriate care. Psychological adjustment varied. Many female auxiliaries had experienced traumatic events: aerial bombardment, combat proximity, displacement from homes. Some exhibited symptoms of what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress. Camp medical staff lacked sophisticated psychiatric training, but provided basic counseling and monitored for severe depression or suicidal ideation. Social dynamics within female POW groups reflected German society's stratification. Officers' auxiliaries sometimes maintained distance from enlisted personnel. Regional differences, Prussian, Bavarian, Austrian, created informal divisions. US administrators generally didn't intervene in these internal social structures unless conflicts disrupted camp order. Educational opportunities included English language classes. Some prisoners sought to learn English, anticipating eventual repatriation to an Allied-occupied Germany where English would be valuable. Other educational activities included vocational training in sewing, typing, or other skills useful for post-war employment. Camp administration fell under military police corps jurisdiction. Each installation had a commanding officer, executive staff, security personnel, and support services. Command responsibilities included maintaining security, enforcing regulations, processing Red Cross communications, managing work details, and ensuring Geneva Convention compliance. Security protocols balanced prevention of escape with humane treatment. Guard towers provided observation points overlooking camp perimeters. Fencing consisted of multiple barriers with clear zones between them, design intended to detect and prevent unauthorized departures. Regular patrols supplemented fixed positions. Escape attempts remained rare among German POWs in US camps. Geographic isolation discouraged escape. Most camps were located far from coasts, making overseas departure impractical. Additionally, many prisoners recognized they received better treatment as POWs than they would face in occupied Germany. Escape risked injury or death with minimal prospect of success. When escapes did occur, procedures included immediate alert to local law enforcement, notification of FBI, and publication of descriptions. Recaptured prisoners faced disciplinary punishment, typically confinement, but not severe penalties. Geneva Convention Article 50 specified that attempted escape alone could not be punished beyond confinement measures. Camp discipline maintained order through a combination of regulations, incentives, and consequences. Prisoners who violated rules, fighting, theft, insubordination, faced disciplinary boards. Punishments ranged from loss of privileges to solitary confinement. Severe violations could result in transfer to higher security facilities. Incentive systems encouraged cooperation. Model prisoners received additional privileges, extended recreation time, better work assignments, first access to mail and packages. This approach recognized that most POWs would cooperate if treated fairly and given reasons to maintain good behavior. Interaction between guards and prisoners developed individual character. Some guards viewed prisoners as defeated enemies, maintaining emotional distance. Others, particularly those who worked daily with prisoner work details, developed cordial professional relationships. Regulations prohibited personal friendships, but couldn't entirely prevent human connection between individuals working side by side. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, played essential roles in POW welfare. Neutral Swiss representatives conducted regular inspections of detention facilities, interviewed prisoners without guards present, and reported findings to belligerent nations. These inspections verified Geneva Convention compliance and identified problems requiring correction. Red Cross delegates typically visited camps quarterly. Inspection protocols included examination of quarters, medical facilities, food quality, work conditions, and recreational provisions. Delegates interviewed randomly selected prisoners, asking about treatment, complaints, and communication with families. Reports were compiled and transmitted to both detaining and home governments. Mail service represented a critical Red Cross function. Letters from prisoners to families passed through ICRC processing to ensure delivery despite disrupted European infrastructure. Similarly, incoming mail from Germany was routed through Switzerland to reach POWs in American camps. This service maintained family connections that prisoners considered vital to morale. Package delivery supplemented camp provisions. Red Cross organized shipment of standardized parcels containing food, clothing, and personal items. These packages, funded by donations and government contributions, provided supplemental nutrition and comfort items. By 1945, German POWs in US camps received regular Red Cross parcels despite Germany's deteriorating situation. Repatriation of seriously wounded or ill prisoners proceeded under ICRC supervision. Geneva Convention provisions allowed for exchange of prisoners unable to continue military service due to disability. Mixed medical commissions, composed of neutral physicians, examined candidates and determined eligibility. ICRC arranged transportation and oversaw exchanges at neutral ports. Communication of POW status to families relied on ICRC information bureaus. When prisoners first entered captivity, capture cards were completed and transmitted to Geneva. ICRC maintained central records, allowing families to inquire about missing relatives. This service provided crucial information to anxious families, uncertain whether loved ones were dead, captured, or missing. Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, fundamentally altered POW dynamics. With hostilities concluded, the legal basis for detention shifted from wartime necessity to post-war processing and eventual repatriation. The sudden influx of millions of additional prisoners, German forces surrendered en masse, overwhelmed Allied processing capabilities. US authorities faced unprecedented administrative challenges. Approximately 7.5 million German military personnel were in Allied custody by June 1945. Processing this population for repatriation required massive logistical coordination. Priorities had to be established: who would return first, what screening procedures would apply, how to manage food and shelter for millions awaiting transport. Female POWs generally received priority for early repatriation. Military authorities recognized that women posed minimal security threat and had dependents needing their return. However, transportation limitations meant repatriation occurred gradually over many months. News of Germany's defeat reached POW camps through official announcements and Red Cross communications. Reactions varied. Some prisoners expressed relief that the war had ended. Others faced grief over Germany's destruction and uncertainty about family members' fates. A few hardcore Nazi believers refused to accept defeat as legitimate. Camp administrators monitored for heightened tensions. Ideological conflicts occasionally erupted between Nazi loyalists and anti-Nazi prisoners. Separate housing sometimes proved necessary to prevent violence between these factions. US authorities generally avoided involvement in internal political disputes unless they threatened camp security. Information about Germany's condition arrived through letters, Red Cross reports, and eventually newspaper access. Prisoners learned of destroyed cities, displaced populations, occupation zones, and severe food shortages. The contrast between their relatively comfortable detention and Germany's devastation created complex psychological responses: guilt, anxiety, fear about what they would face upon return. Denazification screening began during summer 1945. Allied authorities required questionnaires documenting Nazi party membership, positions held, and participation in war crimes. This process determined repatriation priority. Non-Nazis and low-level members could expect earlier return, while those with significant Nazi involvement faced extended detention and possible prosecution. Geneva Convention Article 27 permitted prisoner labor while prohibiting military work. US authorities developed extensive labor programs employing German POWs in agriculture, forestry, and other non-military industries. These programs addressed wartime labor shortages while providing productive occupation for prisoners. Agricultural work represented the largest employment category. With millions of American men serving in military forces, farms faced severe labor shortages during harvest seasons. German POWs filled this gap, working in fields across the South, Midwest, and West. Crops included cotton, vegetables, fruits, and grains. Labor procedures followed strict regulations. Private employers contracted with military authorities, agreeing to pay prevailing wages. Prisoners received compensation in canteen coupons. Guards accompanied work details to prevent escapes and ensure proper treatment. Working conditions had to meet Geneva standards: reasonable hours, adequate breaks, protection from hazardous conditions. Some farmers initially resisted employing German POWs, viewing them as enemies. Others pragmatically recognized that labor shortages threatened their livelihoods and harvests would rot without workers. Over time, many employers reported that German prisoners worked competently and reliably. Interactions between POWs and civilian populations occurred during work details. Guards maintained supervision, but complete isolation proved impractical. Some civilians offered prisoners cigarettes or refreshments. Others maintained hostile distance. These informal contacts exposed prisoners to American society beyond camp fences. Economic impact of POW labor proved significant. Labor programs also served penological purposes. Occupation reduced boredom and restlessness among prisoners. Physical work provided exercise and outdoor time. Productive labor fostered sense of purpose. These factors contributed to overall camp stability and prisoner morale. Repatriation planning began before Germany's surrender, but accelerated dramatically afterward. Allied authorities divided responsibility. Soviets handled POWs in Eastern Europe, while Western allies managed those in their zones. The United States faced logistical challenge of returning 425,000 German POWs from North American camps to Europe. Transportation bottlenecks constrained repatriation pace. Available shipping prioritized returning American troops, Operation Magic Carpet, bringing millions of US service members home. POW return received lower priority, meaning many German prisoners remained in US camps through 1946. Screening procedures preceded repatriation. Denazification questionnaires identified individuals requiring additional investigation. War crimes suspects faced arrest and transfer to prosecution authorities. The vast majority of POWs, however, presented no security concerns and underwent routine processing. Repatriation priorities evolved over months. Initially, physically disabled and seriously ill prisoners returned first via Red Cross medical exchanges. Next came women, then agricultural workers during off-seasons, and finally, general prisoner population. Officers and Nazi Party members typically repatriated last. Processing stations organized departures. Camp personnel verified documentation, conducted medical screenings, and assembled travel groups. Rail transport moved prisoners to East Coast ports, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. There they boarded ships for return crossings to European ports, Bremen, Hamburg, Le Havre. Conditions aboard repatriation ships varied. Some vessels were well-maintained troop ships with adequate facilities. Others were aging cargo vessels pressed into service to accelerate return schedules. Geneva Convention standards technically no longer applied after hostilities ended, but US authorities generally maintained humane conditions. Upon arrival in Europe, former POWs underwent additional processing by occupation authorities. Those destined for Soviet-occupied zones faced particular uncertainty. Soviet policies toward returning POWs proved harsh, viewing surrender as betrayal. Those returning to Western zones entered displaced persons processing systems, received identity documents, and attempted to locate surviving family members. Return to destroyed homeland proved traumatic for many. Cities lay in ruins, infrastructure collapsed, food remained scarce. Former POWs often found families scattered, homes destroyed, communities unrecognizable. Some discovered relatives had perished in bombing raids or died during war's final chaos. Female auxiliaries' return presented unique challenges. Many had lost homes to bombing. Employment prospects in devastated Germany were bleak. Social stigma sometimes attached to women who had served military organizations, particularly as Nazi regime's reputation deteriorated through revelations of atrocities. Repatriation procedures for women paralleled those for men: documentation, medical screening, assembly into transport groups. However, female prisoners generally received priority placement aboard earlier repatriation ships. Military authorities recognized women's vulnerability and urgency of reuniting mothers with children. The journey back across the Atlantic brought mixed emotions. Relief at returning home mixed with anxiety about unknown conditions. Friendships formed during detention would dissolve as prisoners returned to separate regions of Germany. For some, American camps had provided strange interlude of relative security before facing uncertain futures. Reception in Germany varied. Occupation authorities processed returning POWs through camps, where they received temporary documentation and ration cards. Women typically moved through this system more quickly than men, facing less intensive screening since their military roles had been non-combat. Economic conditions in post-war Germany proved extremely difficult. Currency was nearly worthless until 1948 reform. Food remained severely rationed. Housing shortages meant many families crowded into damaged buildings or displaced persons camps. Employment was scarce. Industries lay in ruins and reconstruction proceeded slowly. Former auxiliaries faced additional obstacles. Their military service sometimes hindered civilian job prospects. Employers hesitated to hire women associated with Wehrmacht, fearing public criticism. Some women concealed their service records, claiming civilian backgrounds to improve employment chances. Social reintegration varied by individual circumstances. Those who reunited with intact families generally adjusted better than women who found themselves alone. Community attitudes toward returning POWs ranged from welcome to suspicion. Some civilians viewed POWs as having avoided Germany's final suffering, creating resentment. Some former POWs maintained correspondence with American guards or nurses they'd befriended. These letters violated no regulations once repatriation was complete. Exchanges described conditions in occupied Germany and occasionally included care packages sent from America. These connections illustrated how wartime interactions sometimes transcended enmity. Comparative analysis of World War II POW treatment reveals stark variations. Western Allies generally maintained Geneva Convention standards. Germany's treatment of Western Allied POWs was reasonably correct, motivated partly by reciprocity concerns. Eastern Front conditions proved catastrophic. Soviet and German forces both perpetrated mass atrocities against POWs. Approximately 3.3 million Soviet POWs died in German captivity, roughly 58% of those captured. Deliberate starvation, exposure, and execution characterized Nazi policies towards Soviet prisoners. This treatment stemmed from ideological racism and contempt for Slavic peoples. International law proved meaningless when belligerents rejected its legitimacy. Conversely, German POWs in Soviet captivity faced harsh conditions. Of approximately 3 million captured, roughly 1 million died, about 33%. Labor camps in harsh climates, inadequate food, disease, and minimal medical care caused high mortality. Repatriation extended through 1956, with some prisoners held for over a decade. Western Allied treatment of German POWs demonstrated markedly different approach. US and British authorities generally maintained Geneva standards. Mortality rates remained low, under 1%. This treatment reflected both legal commitments and strategic calculation that humane treatment might encourage surrender rather than desperate resistance. Japanese POW treatment deserves mention for contrast. Japan had not ratified Geneva Convention and rejected its applicability. Treatment of Allied POWs by Japanese forces proved brutal: forced labor, starvation, medical neglect, execution. Approximately 27% of Allied POWs held by Japan died in captivity, compared to about 4% held by Germany. These comparative statistics underscore importance of international law enforcement and reciprocity. Nations that maintained Geneva standards generally received reciprocal treatment for their own captured personnel. Those that violated these standards invited retaliation and set precedents that undermined prisoner welfare. Post-war prosecution of POW-related war crimes established legal precedents. Nuremberg trials addressed systematic mistreatment. Japanese leaders faced Tokyo tribunal charges. These prosecutions affirmed principle that Geneva violations constituted criminal conduct, not merely military expediency. The experience of German female POWs in US camps represents relatively minor historical footnote within vast World War II prisoner populations. However, it demonstrates functioning of international humanitarian law under conditions where enforcement mechanisms operated. Contrast between their treatment and fate of POWs on Eastern Front illustrates law's value when nations choose compliance.